Everyone, this is Unit 7, Lecture 5, Experiencing and Expressing Emotion. Here are our learning targets, and let's dive in. How are emotions experienced? Well, they are experienced either unconsciously or consciously. So let's talk about unconsciously first. We often have emotions that we don't even realize are happening. There is a fast response system that relies on our deep brain circuitry. So it's like something we're not aware of deep in the bowels of our brain, and it operates automatically. And these are connected to implicit memory. You might even want to jot that down. And remember, implicit memories are those memories that we don't even realize that we have. So let's say at some point in our youth, we get bitten by a dog. There's that old implicit memory example. Our unconscious emotion later on would help us detect when we're being approached by another dog to be on guard. So we might have unconscious emotions that are helping us seek out potential danger or learn to identify threats so we can get out of those situations, connected to that fight or flight model. We also experience emotions consciously. These generate at a slower rate because we're thinking about them, we're analyzing them, we're connecting them to explicit memories. So you might want to jot that down. And these are some conscious memories that we want to remember, but we might want to remember them and then talk about how we felt about that memory. So I loved that chocolate peanut butter ice cream, or, oh, it was awful when my toe got stubbed when I stubbed my toe. So this relies heavily on our cerebral cortex, which is very much involved with our judgment and our memories and things of that sort. Speaking of our cerebral cortex, what parts of our brain, what are involved in experiencing emotion? So the biology is quite extensive for emotion. First of all, we use our limbic system, specifically our amygdala. The amygdala is that part of us that's constantly on alert for threats, and that often sends signals to our body as to how to react to a certain emotional moment. It's also very much in tune to that subliminal threat, that gut feeling like something is not safe. I need to get out of here. This person maybe is not okay. And so that's our amygdala talking to us. As I just mentioned, we use our cerebral cortex, and that helps us associate stimuli with memories and feelings. And if you remember from a different lecture, the left cortex specializes in our positive feelings and memories, and then our right in our negative ones. We also use the reticular formation. It works in conjunction with the thalamus and amygdala. It's part of that old part of our brain. And if a threat is detected, it helps arouse our body into action, which leads me directly to our autonomic nervous system. Remember that automatic one that divides into these two parts. The sympathetic system, which gears us up. It's active when startled or experiencing an unpleasant emotion. So like anger, our sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear, and then our parasympathetic slows us down. And it's more dominant in calming and pleasant emotions. So to flip back for a second, the reticular formation works in conjunction with the thalamus and amygdala in detecting threats to know whether or not to activate the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. And if you can remember a time where it took you a long time to calm down, whether it was from extreme excitement or extreme anger or fear or even sadness, remember that that is because hormones are also released when we experience emotions, and it takes time for those to dissipate. So a couple key emotion-based hormones, or hormones that influence our emotions, include serotonin, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Serotonin helps stabilize our emotions. And so we often associate serotonin with happiness, or we might recognize that there is a deficiency in serotonin when we have feelings of depression. So when serotonin drops, that's often where depression comes to be. Epinephrine is produced in fear. Norepinephrine is, even though they're similar, gets produced more in relation to anger. So we're still talking about experiencing emotions. How do we experience specific types of emotions? Well, first I want to talk about Izzard. And Izzard's theory is that humans have 10 basic emotions that we can experience. joy, interest/excitement, surprise, sadness, anger, disgust, contempt, fear, shame, and guilt. And that all other emotions are actually combinations of these 10. Let's look at a few specific ones. Fear. Fear is learned. No one is born fearing things. It is learned. It is learned through conditioning and observation, seeing, associating emotions with specific situations that we see other people be fearful in, or that we've learned might be negative for us, and so we learn to fear those same situations. We also do have a biological predisposition to fear certain things, like maybe dangerous animals, or food that gives us a taste aversion to recognize, like, oh, I'm not going to get near that again. Our amygdala has proven so vital to the fear emotion that if it's damaged, people's fear response is diminished. So in people that have had damage to their amygdala, they might not even get scared at something they should be scared of. Also learned, phobias. Phobias specifically are above average fear to the point where someone couldn't even cope. So if we saw a spider and you're scared of spiders, that you just overreact in every way and you cannot even potentially like walk around it or continue on with your day. So that's the difference between just a general fear and a phobia. I believe we'll talk about phobias more when we get to our abnormal psych unit. Next is anger. What makes us angry? Well, things that are frustrating, insulting, willful, meaning done to us on purpose, unjustified, there's no good excuse for it, or avoidable, where someone could have or something could have been different so you didn't have to experience this angry emotion. Is anger good or bad? Should we really be trying to talk ourselves out of anger all the time? Yes and no. Chronic hostility, chronic constant anger is dangerous. It's actually linked to heart disease. If you think about it, if you're angry, you're constantly activating your sympathetic nervous system, and that's keeping your body at an amped up stage too much. So much so that it can cause negative side effects on your body physically. However, when controlled, anger can be good because that pent up anger or irrational anger can lead to that elevated sympathetic nervous system. But if you can control that anger, it can actually lead to you talking it out in kind of a healthy or at least productive way to solve it so it doesn't continue. It is actually kind of I won't say an urban legend, but it's a misnomer that expressing your anger is a good idea. There's some gray area there. The catharsis hypothesis is that releasing aggressive energy can relieve aggressive urges. So if you let it out, that anger will dissipate. But what can often happen instead is that it can lead to more hostility because you're being reinforced with that anger. You're experiencing it over and over again. You're feeling that relief, which feels good, but then it's going to make you want to be angry and then relieve it again. So you build up anger, you build up the conflict, you act out on it, and then it might actually make you angrier and amp you up more in the future. So how should you deal with anger then? You should wait until your physical arousal calms down, your whole body systems calm down, and then you can express your grievances in a productive way. So forgiveness, if you think about everything I just said, forgiveness has better results than revenge. You are better off trying to calm down, think through it, and get past it than you are to try to get revenge or indulge your anger further. Next, let's talk about happiness. People who are happy perceive the world as safer, make decisions more easily, are more cooperative, and live happier, more satisfied lives. Duh! But what else can we learn about happiness? We have a couple phenomena to talk about. The first one is the feel good, do good phenomenon. People tend to be helpful to others when they are in a good mood. Yes, you're in a good mood, you see someone drop their books all over the hallway, you are way more likely to go over there and help them pick it up, and then maybe even spread the happiness. But if you're in a bad mood, you might look around and see if there's any way you can get past that person without actually doing something for them. So when you feel good, you tend to do good. And also, by the way, doing good tends to make you feel good. So do something good. Adaptation level phenomenon is the tendency to judge various stimuli as relative to previous experiences. So to work some happiness in there, we are only as happy as something before. So let's say that we win the lottery. That's going to make us pretty darn happy, right? Things are probably going to get really good. But then after you get over that initial feeling and maybe your life kind of comes into a new normal, you adjust to a new neutral level. And then you react to the variations up and down from there. So it's going to take something else to raise your happiness level, something better than winning the lottery, I suppose, to adjust your happiness level back up. A similar concept, not so happiness focused, is relative deprivation. And this is the perception that you are worse off relative to those you compare yourself to. And so many people will fall victim to this. So instead of comparing yourself to someone else saying, man, I've got it so much better than them, we tend to look at someone else and think that they have it better than us. All right, enough about experiencing emotions. Now, how do we express them? Well, one of the most obvious ways that we express them is with our face. So we're going to take a look at that with universal emotions. Paul Ekman suggests, he is a psychologist that suggested that all people speak and understand the same facial language universally. So he believes in these two things, not only that we express our emotions with our faces, but that they are universal. And across culture, we all tend to have the same 7. Unlike the Izzard 10, we have the Ekman 7. Happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, contempt, and fear can all be read on faces, even amongst a culturally diverse group of people shown all sorts of photographs. They tend to identify those facial expressions in similar ways. We also know that people who are blind and people who live in isolated communities without access to a lot of other communities respond with the same facial expressions when asked to describe something sad or happy. These expressive differences occur across cultures due to display rules, context, and intensity. So our cultures tend to ingrain in us when it's okay to show emotion, how much emotion, and whether or not to share our emotions at all. And so emotions are heavily influenced by socio-cultural phenomena. Let's get into that a little bit further by talking about gender and emotional cues. Just as we know there are cultural differences in whether or not someone will express their emotions, there's also gender differences and gender differences within cultures. I know, it's confusing. This will come as no surprise to you that American women are allowed or encouraged to express their emotions more than men. Sometimes this works against them as it makes women look weak or soft if they express their emotions too much. However, over time, this has become very ingrained in our culture, so much so that women are more likely to rate themselves as emotionally open. Women are also better, actually scientifically better, at identifying nonverbal emotions, and they're better at describing emotional reactions in a complex way. So if they're describing a life situation, they can kind of analyze the ins and outs of their emotions in relation to that life situation more so than a man can. So why is this? Well, most likely it's because boys are reinforced, especially as they're growing up, are reinforced for being tough and strong and not crying or not getting upset, and they're often punished for being weak or soft by showing their emotions. And so women or girls are reinforced for the opposite. They're hugged and given attention when they're crying or they're upset, and they're seen as kind of cold or distant if they are not expressing their emotions. So over time, women have actually, in their expressions of their emotions, become better at these two things and are more confident in identifying themselves as being more emotionally open. But that doesn't actually mean that men can't be or aren't. Overall, gender differences in expressions of emotions is culturally based. What about detecting and computing emotion? How good are we at knowing it when we see it? I am talking mostly about lying. Most of us are poor lie detectors because we interact with people in very familiar situations all the time, and we don't feel the need to pay attention to nonverbal skills because we're in these comfortable situations and we're just having conversations with people. But those nonverbal expressions of emotion are key to detecting lies. But this is so difficult that even experts, and I'm talking policemen, psychiatrists, judges, when tested, were only able to detect lies 54% of the time. So what should we be looking for? Some signs that indicate deception include increased cognitive effort. And you can just pick out a couple of these things. You don't need to write down everything. But if you can tell someone's putting more cognitive effort into their story, they might be lying. It's like longer pauses in speech or being maybe stiffer or more focused. Evidence of physical and behavioral arousal. So think of like anxiety-based body language, posture shifts, speech errors, being nervous and gesturing or shrugging a lot. Trying to maintain a poker face, but yet still increasing body language with maybe more nervous smiles or hand gestures again, or even just by being able to tell by looking in their eyes. Speaking of which, if someone is looking directly in your eye, are they lying to you? Well, it depends. If the person is generally an honest person, they're probably not going to be able to look at you straight in the eye when they're telling you a lie. So that's a signal. But if someone's a very good liar, they're not going to have a problem doing it. So it's not exactly helpful unless you know the person really, really well. And then what about polygraphs? We've got these tools, right? Why can't we just use those? Well, let's talk about how they work. What they do is they're actually measuring levels of arousal. So increased heart rate, breathing rate, the moisture of your fingertips, whether or not your palms are getting sweaty, while being asked certain types of questions. First of all, control questions. So asking a person who's being questioned something that would already make them anxious or nervous to see how their body reacts. Once you have that read, that baseline, that control line, then you can ask those critical questions, the ones that might be like, where were you the night that Miss Russ disappeared? The one you're actually trying to get to the bottom of. But then you're also going to ask some irrelevant questions that will still get truthful answers like, how do you know Miss Russ? Or what do you learn in her classes? So things that are kind of irrelevant that shouldn't cause a lot of anxiety or heightened arousal. How accurate are they? Well, not very, quite frankly. They are too broad and they tend to produce lots of false positives where it looks like people are lying when they're really not. Because, as we should already know by now, there might be multiple reasons for the same physical response. So you might just be nervous that you're being questioned, or you're nervous that something bad has happened to Miss Russ or someone else you know or care about, or you might just be nervous by the authority in front of you and feel like you need to lie because you're scared. The good news, I guess, is that only half of our states allow polygraph evidence in court. Most states or most law enforcement agencies just use polygraphs as maybe a direction to try to pick up on leads to investigate further. They're not actually going to use that as concrete evidence to determine someone's innocence or guilt.